thanks everyone for taking some time out of your day today to attend our webinar, What Librarians Should Know About Authentication. Again, my name is Jeff Arsenault. I work here at EBSCO in our software as a service and expressly with OpenAthens. And as we are finding out these days, paramount to research is the ability for your patrons to easily access the content of their choice from anywhere they happen to be. OpenAthens, the reason we've gathered here today, facilitates this access securely and intuitively while providing administrators with valuable insight on what materials are vital to their research. Today we have speaker Christina Symes from OpenAthens. Christina is the technical solutions lead there and author of Access to Online Resources, a guide for the modern librarian, with the determined mission to make the librarian's job easier. Christina has daily interactions across a variety of environments all over the globe, and they've allowed her to help librarians achieve their goals through bridging the gap between technical and non-technical roles with a mix of expert knowledge and a no-nonsense approach. Christina, thanks for joining us today. I will hand this over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is feeling okay, and thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us. So today we will be talking about authentication, but more importantly, what you as a librarian should know about it. And the first thing, of course, we should know what authentication is. Let me tell you a quick story about Jane. Jane is a librarian. Early morning, she comes into the office, makes herself a cup of tea, and opens the laptop to check her emails. Immediately, she is prompted to log in. So Jane types in her username and password, which then go to her Active Directory server here on the right. Active Directory looks her up in a list of accounts, recognizes she is a valid user, and lets her in. Authentication seeks to answer the question, who are you? So in this case, Active Directory knows Jane and she's authenticated in. But then what is authorization? What's the difference? Suppose Jane has checked her emails and she now needs to pull some reports for the meeting in a couple of hours. She navigates to shared files, but accidentally clicks on the HR icon instead of the reports one. Computer displays a message advising she's not authorized to access this folder. This is authorization decision made by her IT department. So authorization wants to know, what can you access? Another good example of authorization is when you can log into Science Direct, but are unable to access specific journal. In that case, the publisher is making authorization decision based on your subscriptions. In terms of technology used for accessing online resources, there really isn't much choice today. So two main players are IP and SAML access methods. IP can be compared to good old Victoria sponge here on the left, while SAML is much fancier and flavorsome. Regardless, you will still end up eating cake. And eating cake has its perks as well as its drawbacks. In other words, no technology is perfect. And this is what our choice of cake looks like in practice. The top camp is SAML-based vendors, and the bottom is IP-based. Since we clearly have more bottom than top, let's talk about IP first. And for those of you who wonder what that squiggly diagram on the left is, that's a VPN, so virtual private network. Many of you will be familiar with this type of device by logging into your work networks when you're working offsite. So before we begin, let me ask you a question. And I'm really interested to see what you think. How old do you think is the Internet Protocol, IP? Michelle will start a poll, which will pop up on your GoToMeeting webinar options. If you could please vote, how old do you think the IP is? Okay, we can see numbers coming in.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of answers right now. Trending towards 20 years, 44 years. We have some for 15. And it looks like we have about 90% of the votes in, Chris, and you want to provide us with an answer to that question?
Excellent. So it looks like the majority of you are right. It is 44 years. In fact, well done. It is quite old indeed. These two gentlemen you see on the screen, they have invented the protocol while working in the MIT on the ARPANET project. And for this, they are now known as fathers of the internet. So once they did that, obviously the whole connection craze kicked off, and the US military tried to lock down the ARPANET once they realized that 57 computers were connected. Can you imagine that? I'm sure glad they didn't succeed. So this is one evidence of them trying to lock it down. So, fun facts aside, authentication has little to do with the IP itself. According to the Oxford Dictionary, to authenticate means have one's identity verified. An IP address does not contain any personal information and is therefore quite unsuitable for the job. The best it can do is identify the perceived owner of that IP address at the time without any way to verify whether this perception is true. At OpenAthens, we call it IP recognition. So the publisher recognizes an incoming IP address and allows it to view more content than you would normally be able to. Suppose you're one of those lucky institutions who still have static IP addresses. Accessing content from on-site works fine, but for remote access, you'd either have to utilize a VPN or utilize some kind of proxy server. A question for you. What do you think proxy does? Michelle will launch a poll. There won't be too many questions, don't worry, just 3 of them. We're halfway through. Just really interested to see.
Got a lot of answers on this one, Chris, and they're split pretty evenly amongst the 3.
It is a trick question, I have to say.
I'd say most of our participants think that it changes the user's IP address.
Yep, it does do that. It does do that indeed. But in fact, it also conducts man-in-the-middle attack. It does both. The very principle of proxy is man-in-the-middle attack. And what that is, Dev Singer asked just now, what that is essentially what I'm displaying in the picture. It interrupts the traffic from one party to another party, and it observes everything that party does. So let me explain. As you can see here, proxy is the stick man in the middle. It cleverly pretends to be Ted on his behalf and processes all traffic between the publisher and Ted, the user. It knows every single click the user has made on any proxied website, and as such, it is the ultimate snooping device. In fact, that is what that attack is, except that in this case, it is used for good purpose, you might say. Not that it is a bad technology, I'm not saying that. It serves its purpose. However, we must keep in mind that security was not a major concern back when the proxy access first emerged. Access was. Nor we were concerned with good user journey. The World Wide Web was not overly competitive back then, and the user journey has never improved for proxy users, unfortunately. If you went onto a website and attempted to log in via your institution, you would most likely hit a dead end. So in here, we can see at Aerospace Research Central, and I'm basing the story of one of my conversations with one of the students here in the UK. They were aerospace engineering students. They went onto this website after finding the article that they want to see, which was about low aspect ratio wings. They clicked on institution login and says, see, I can't find my institution here because the institution is using easy proxy. And unfortunately, due to the way web works, you can only list federated organizations in such a manner. So essentially, they hit a dead end. Another inconvenience for those concerned with piracy or inflated content prices is that 58% of IP address ranges held by publishers were found to be inaccurate. If your university subscribed to Widely Online, for example, changed IP addresses and forgot to tell the publisher, another institution may now be using your subscription. True story. This has once happened in Germany, and this was one of the stories that the IP registry told their users once they were established. So the IP registry is a place where you can put your IP ranges for the publishers to view, and they are being constantly checked. So publishers trust that registry and institutions trust that registry, that all information there is correct. So it helps reduce the amount of piracy that's going on. And finally, the world has run out of IP addresses as we know them, called IPv4. So what you see here is Internet Protocol version 4, essentially. We're out of those. Africa registry is the last one, and they're going out in March 2019. And the hexadecimal number you see below is how all IP addresses will look like in a few years' time. And they're not that easy on the eye. They're not that easy to work with. So to summarize, here's a quick rundown of IP-based access benefits and drawbacks. It sure is good that it's very easy to enable access using IP address. It is well-known authorization methods, but it is not designed for authentication. It has many license breach risks. So for example, if one of your users downloads too much and there isn't any protection put on your proxy server, then you might just get that one proxy IP address disabled, which will cut off access for the entire institution. And I'm sure we all have stories like that. Security risks, as I mentioned, if your proxy server gets hacked, then whoever hacked that server can see every single thing your users do on their websites. It is easy to not have any login when being on site if you still have static IP addresses, but remote access is getting trickier, and that is due to SSL upgrades, which means that publishers are strengthening their web security. Users have to use a special link to get into the resource. They cannot just go to the website and find their institution. And whilst no identity verification is required, which is absolutely great for those who love anonymity, personalization is also not possible, causing researchers sort of miss out on good features where they could store their bookmarks, where they could store their research, and sort of utilize those features on publisher websites. So going back to the vendors we spoke about before, let's explore who lives in the top camp. So Shibboleth is open source and OpenAthens is proprietary, and they are both SAML-based vendors. But what is this SAML? So SAML, or Security Assertion Markup Language, is that fancier cake we spoke about earlier. It works like this. Rob, who is a doctor, on the left, Rob wants to go and read an article about stem cells. He goes to Science Direct and says, hi, Science Direct, I'm from the hospital. Science Direct sends a request to that hospital and says, hey, do you know this guy? Hospital prompts Rob to log in to their very own Active Directory and says, hello, do you work for us? Rob says, I do, here's my ID. Hospital goes back to Science Direct, says, oh yeah, that's Rob, he works for us. And then Science Direct lets Rob in and lets him read the article. So all of this happens in split second in the real world, but this is the core of SAML. This is how it works. So it's a trusted relationship between the publisher and the institution to verify users' identity. And SAML is the protocol that underpins a very special trusted members club called Federation. It does so to provide single sign-on experience between websites. The Federation is comprised of institutions and publishers that have enrolled to that club, met geographic, security, and user experience requirements, and now enjoy seamless access from resource to resource. And on the screen, we see just a couple of examples of publishers and institutions that participate in this sort of interaction. So there are currently 66 national federations in the world. All of them are academic or educational. OpenAthens is the only global federation that serves both academia and commercial research organizations. And we also work with those national federations. You may have heard of A21 Initiative before, resource access for the 21st century. One of its aims is to eradicate the IP-based access and the associated issues. So as they say here in their statement, publishers, libraries, and consumers have all come to the understanding that authorizing access to content based on IP address no longer works in today's distributed world. So they're set out to change that, and what they're trying to do is come up with a set of recommendations, standards that would hopefully be implemented industry-wide to benefit researchers, publishers, as well as libraries who are customers for those publishers. So for libraries, they could maximize value for money if they followed those recommendations, protect user privacy and advocate security, which is something federated access can absolutely do for you, and minimize administrative effort, which is also quite important. For researchers, many of them want seamless access from any location. Users are used to services like Netflix and Amazon, where they can pair their devices or they can be recognized based on a single login. They don't want to do too many logins or always go by the library portal, and this is what A21 are seeking to address as well. They want consistent, personalized user experience as well as security for those details. And publishers, if they follow those standards, they could benefit by obtaining more granular usage reporting and personalized services to researchers. Because really, if you report usage per IP address, you don't get that much granularity at all. So in summary, these are the benefits and drawbacks of federated access. Security is one, personalization, as I mentioned, transparency is another good one. I didn't put in anonymity in here, but anonymity can also be achieved with federated access fairly easily, whilst retaining personalization. Full control is another feature that you cannot get with proxy services, and potential to reduce the price of subscription because you know exactly who is using the service, how often, and you know all of this can help you in negotiation. It is perceived as quite complex, so SAML has been around for 2 decades now, for quite a while, and initially it was quite hard to implement. Unless you have expert shibboleth developers or you know about OpenAthens, this technology is likely to be perceived as a lot more complex than IP. Another thing that, again, A21 is seeking to address is different login points on publishers' websites. So if you went to Wiley and then you went to Taylor and Francis, you would find your login buttons in different places, and that can be quite confusing to users. Also, inconsistent deep linking on publishers' platforms. What I mean by that is that every single publisher will use their own linking logic on their websites, unless they're based on Atapon. Atapon platform uses consistent deep linking formula, but all others, they will have their very own ways of creating deep links. And again, unless you're using an easy proxy prefix, an OpenAthens prefix, if you are using shibboleth, for example, you will have quite a bit of work to configure those links. So we have to be realistic, right? IP-based access will not go away until the community starts demanding something better. Some vendors have adapted to combine both access methods in various ways. For example, EasyProxy and LibLinks use shibbolized proxy, where proxy is the main method of access, but users get a more secure initial login using SAML. OpenAthens have developed an in-house proxy solution to support access to websites that only support the IP. So it's still very much a requirement to support those smaller publishers that are unable or unwilling to participate in the federated scheme. Which brings me to the next point. Integration is key, but it is often overlooked. When dealing with any authentication product, it is important to consider how it will fit into your entire system. Just ask the vendor or your IT team for a simple diagram like this one. For example, we can see that there are a lot of red lines in this picture. They mean the user will have to log in again and again because your applications don't talk to each other. The only single sign-on bit happens in the yellow square. Now let's have a look at this arrangement. Pretty much same applications, but redundant pieces are removed and applications are connected in such a way as to provide beautiful site-wide single sign-on experience. There is no need to be technical to make this happen. As a customer, you have a great power to make vendors work together, or at least implement their products with your key requirements in mind. If single sign-on is one of them, chances are most of your vendors will already have features in place to help achieve that. So we can see here that SITS, Blackboard, Adobe, they all have single sign-on capabilities, but for whatever reason, they have not been connected to your IDFS or to whatever other directory you might be using. Okay, last but not least, we have links. Links account for 99% of tickets on our service desk. Improperly configured link or unconfigured link, like in this picture, can cause very long user journeys to occur. So here we see a 6-step user journey, but I have worked with institutions that have 12, 13-step user journeys, and I don't know a single student who would persevere with that many steps to get to the resource that they want. So in this case, we start at the library portal. It's still a very common user journey to start at the library portal. We log into the library portal, we see databases A to Z, click on A to N, and that A to N happens to be an unauthenticated link. So it is not configured with Easy Proxy prefix, it's not configured with OpenAthens prefix, nor is it configured in any special way for Shibboleth. So what it does, it takes you to the website, but it does not recognize you in any shape or form as coming from that institution. The user has to click login, has to find login via your institution, then find the institution in the wave page, and then be redirected to the local login, which of course is not integrated with your resource access system. So you have to log in again. And then user details are finally sent to the publisher and you are finally logged in. Now this is a real example. This is an actual map of one of the health checks that I've done for our customers, which can be simplified in 2 steps just by using the correct link. Say your library portal authenticates against your Active Directory. Suppose your Active Directory is plugged into your system Shibboleth or OpenAthens, and then your link is an authenticated link that has some sort of prefix. It will just take you right in and it will not question. So for the best possible user experience, 3 points to follow. Consider the access method. IP has its limitations. SAML has its drawbacks as well. Depending on the product that you're using, consider how that will affect your user experience. Think about the wider picture. I know it's not very easy to do if you're just working in the library, but it will really pay off to speak to the IT department and see what else you can plug into that one bunch so that when user logs into Blackboard, for example, they automatically get access to everything else. Your users will be delighted if you do that. And third point, mind the links. The links are very important. They can usually be easily configured and most vendors will be able to do that for you or help you out. So I could not possibly finish this without mentioning the most exciting development of the past few years. There is a new single sign-on protocol out, which may revolutionize the way we access resources in the future. It is very lightweight, much easier to implement than SAML, and OpenAthens already supports it. Can you guess which one it is? So Michelle will launch a poll. Haha, I knew someone will vote for blockchain.
Again, we have pretty even submittal across all 3 answers, Christina. looks like OIDC might be nudging ahead.
I think OpenID Connect is the winner, and you're absolutely right. It is OpenID Connect. It is very, very secure. It is absolutely amazing, this protocol, and it's a pleasure to deal with it. So watch the space. There will be a lot more products coming out that are based on OpenID Connect in the future. Thank you very much, and we'll open up for questions.
Great. Well, thanks, Chris. Much appreciated. That was, as usual, you took some fairly complex concepts and distilled them into some very understandable concepts. So we do have a few questions around some of the technology. First was pretty basic. Can you repeat what SAML stands for? Security
Assertion Markup Language. You don't really need to know that, just say SAML.
SAML, yep. And then a second question that is quite pertinent. How do LDAP and CAS fit into the conversation about authentication?
So let me go back a bit on this presentation, and I'll show you that I was very tempted to include protocols in this particular slide, but I thought, you know what, I'll scare people off. So those red lines that you see here, this is where LDAP is used. LDAP, it does not support single sign-on by design. It establishes one-to-one tunnel connections with any application it accesses. And those connections, they cannot be so easily terminated, really, unless you do some development around it. So for example, EasyProxy, as we know, it plugs into the Active Directory by means of LDAP. Now, once you log into EasyProxy, that's it. Unless it's a shibbolized proxy, there is no other way. If you want to log into Adobe afterwards, you will have to do that again. If you want to log into Blackboard here, again, and Blackboard integrates with your Active Directory or your SID system using LDAP, you will have to log in again. So with LDAP, you will just have to establish that connection over and over and over with every single application. So to answer your question, it doesn't really fit. We try to avoid LDAP whenever possible. It's a very old tech, and it was never designed to do that. For some, some applications don't support that. So Shibboleth, it might require LDAP connections. But I know for a fact that Shibboleth now integrates with CAS, and CAS from version 5.1 and upwards, it supports SAML. So you can enable SAML module on CAS pretty easily, and we have documentation on how to do that in case you are interested. And that will give you your SSO.
Great, thanks, Chris. So another question. In Athens single sign-on, would our students be able to log into Brightspace, which I believe is a learning management system, and then not have to log into EBSCO or Sage, for example?
I believe so. Brightspace, to my knowledge, supports SAML, so we should be able to integrate with it very easily.
Great, thanks. Next question is, our library currently uses EasyProxy. Can you talk about what it is like for libraries to migrate over to OpenAthens? In other words, I'd like to know what moving from EasyProxy to OpenAthens entails for library staffs and IT departments.
So you will probably need to change your links. At the moment, you are likely to be using EasyProxy prefix for your links. These will need to be updated to the OpenAthens prefix. Ideally, these would also be encoded, but that can be very easily done with our automated tool. You just plug your links into our interface. It runs the script, and it spits out updated links for you. So that's going to have to be done when you move from product to product, regardless of whether you use liblinks, EasyProxy, or OpenAthens. And then another piece, you currently probably integrate your Active Directory with EasyProxy. So that will need to be done with OpenAthens as well. And we would recommend to either use Azure or ADFS if these sort of modules exist with your Active Directory package, so that you can achieve that single sign-on across all other applications that might be touching your Active Directory. So two things that need to be done there. One is for IT, another one is for the library.
Great. So next question kind of builds on that same answer, Chris. What do you ask your IT department to understand what your current authentication / authorization is. In parentheses, they say we have an outsourced IT group.
Okay. It really depends what you are outsourcing to, what sort of outsourced IDP you're using. Sorry, I threw in the jargon there. IDP is identity provider. So if you outsource your directory services, normally OpenAthens can just have a conversation with your provider, and there is no mystery about how the integration works. Normally there will be some sort of single sign-on option there, be it CAS, be it SAML, and we will be able to integrate in as little as 10 minutes time if we have the IT professionals on the call. There's really not too much to understand there. What they need to know is that they will need to exchange metadata with us. So they will need to give us a link, we will give them a link, and then we will agree what information will be shared between the two systems. That's about it.
Great. Some excellent questions. Please keep them coming in. Next one, Chris, is how can users remain anonymous with SAML?
That can be achieved by using targeted ID. And targeted ID is a shibboleth term. It's sort of an attribute. So SAML all operates on attributes, and attribute is a piece of information. So what targeted ID is a piece of information that is unique between the user and the publisher. So whenever you log in to ScienceDirect or Sage or Wiley Online, same user Ted will have 3 different targeted IDs unique to his transaction with that publisher via the system. So for example, Ted is using OpenAthens, and OpenAthens connects Ted to Sage. There will be one targeted ID defining that transaction. Sage will be able to see that this is a different user from all the other users, even though they do not have the first name, last name, or email address. They will say, okay, I can tell that this is a different user, and they will enable personalization features. Perhaps Sage is not the best example. I can tell for sure that Elsevier will do that, and they will even prompt the user, if they wish, to put in their actual first name and last name so that they don't keep calling that user their targeted ID number, which is essentially just 22 characters of random stuff in a string. So the user will have an option to amend that name. But many systems will support this sort of interaction, which is completely anonymous because you cannot unscramble 22 characters and lead it back to the user. Does that answer the question?
I don't see a follow-up, Chris, so I think so. We have another good question. I think that's pertinent to most academic libraries, and that is, how would library walk-ins get authenticated if every user needs to quote-unquote log in? What prevents them from reusing a temporary login remotely?
Well, again, I do not know what sort of system you're using, but if we are talking about OpenAthens, then you would not be able to use a guest account outside of your library space. If you are using what is called access accounts, and in OpenAthens, that's a term that ties that particular account to the library space based on its IP range. So if there are particular few IPs that only belong to the library, and as soon as you leave the library, you can no longer use that IP address, you will no longer be able to use that particular username and password, even if it's shared.
Great, thanks. Let's see, this is a good question that I think touches on the API connection aspect of the OpenAthens connectors, and that is Symfony, which is a Circe ILS, able to be the identity provider via Symfony Web Services or Symfony API?
Yes, is the answer. Circe, Dynex, Symfony, they are now using CAS services to facilitate single sign-on. Should you wish to do so, they can spin up a server for you at the back end of Circe Symfony and assist with that. But if you do not want to have single sign-on, then it will work very much in the way that LDAP does. It will still work with all of your resources and anything that touches CERSI Symfony. But if you had separate applications set up, for example, Adobe and all your library stuff, then you will probably have to log in again to Adobe if it doesn't touch the OpenAthens system. So CERSI Dynamics have their own proprietary API for which we built a proprietary connector into OpenAthens. So whichever way you choose, we can plug you in fairly easily.
Great, thanks. Plenty of questions, so I'll keep going through. If OpenAthens is configured for single sign-on, can the library add static accounts to OpenAthens for user executions, I believe, that university IT doesn't have in the Active Directory server?
Yes, is a simple answer. So OpenAthens has its own directory that you can utilize alongside your existing directory. If you don't want to plug in your Active Directory as well, you can just use OpenAthens hosted directory. That's no problem at all.
Here's an implementation question. We provide our various vendors with our IP ranges for access purposes. If we were to switch to OpenAthens, would we have to let all our various vendors know? And what would we have to let them know?
Okay. So you have two choices there. You can keep your IP ranges if they are on campus, and OpenAthens can make it work with a single link. So when you are on site, you are just forwarded to your publisher, and the publisher recognizes your on-site IP range. So OpenAthens does nothing, but it does log a statistic against your IP address from which you came. And when you are off-site, then OpenAthens would utilize SAML to achieve this authentication. In which case, you would probably have to let your publishers know your new credentials for OpenAthens, which is something we call entity ID and scope. Entity ID is a unique string of characters that identifies your organization within the federation setting. So remember, federation is the special club where institutions and publishers participate. Every institution and every publisher, they have their own sort of code, which is normally just your domain name. You know, if University X was the.ac.uk, for example, we could use that as your entity ID. So you would have to let your publishers know to add that to their entitlement systems alongside your IP addresses. If you want to do away with IP authentication, then just let them know to add the entity ID and remove the IP addresses that exist. But again, it is, you know, EBSCO and OpenAthens during the implementation would do all of that for you.
Great. That leads us right into our next question, Chris, and that is what kind of support does OpenAthens offer? Is there a support line that customers can call to get assistance with setup, migration, troubleshooting, etc.? Yes, there is, and we work with a lot of international partners as well, such as EBSCO, that provide regional support as well, so that you don't get time delays between UK and wherever you might be. So for example, for USA customers, EBSCO has a dedicated service desk there that you can just call up and get regional support if you want to. Great, and I'll add with EBSCO, the implementation is performed by a team of implementation project managers. So you do get a consultative expert from the very beginning of your subscription. Next question is, my site tracks web traffic with Google Analytics. Does OpenAthens support Google Analytics so we can track the user from page to page to the final handoff to vendor? Yes and no. So we cannot track the user in terms of what EasyProxy does. We cannot do man-in-the-middle attack and track their clicks. That's what counter reports are for. So we don't intrude on the publisher's privacy and their reporting that they provide. But what we do is when user logs into a particular resource, we will log a statistic against that user for that resource. And we do use Google Analytics to the extent as to provide very nice graphic reports for
those statistics. So you can, for example, report per department, per group. You can see what groups use what resources, when they do that, when your library is the busiest, and so on and so forth. But we do not do click tracking. That's the only thing.
Okay. Is there aggregated usage reporting for all resources linked to OpenAthens?
Yes, would be a simple answer, and I would probably have to say that, you know, if you want to find out more, drop Jeff a line, so he can do a very nice demo for you. Really, you know, you have to see it to fully understand it. I suppose it can be explained in few words. But yes, there are various ways to aggregate the data in the reporting interface and display it in a graphic way.
Great, thanks, Chris. We touched on this one before, but I think there might be a little bit more to it. You mentioned both usage tracking and anonymity as benefits of SAML. How are these competing values supported?
So user tracking. Well, user tracking is not done in an intrusive way. As I mentioned, we do not tag traffic. So Easy Proxy sort of has to tag traffic to serve the content back to the user. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do that. OpenAthens doesn't tag the traffic because it doesn't use IP. It is not based on that protocol. What it is based is a web service called SAML, and SAML transactions, they happen by exchange of attributes. So unless you specifically decide to send the publisher some personal information about the user, the publisher will not know who the user is, but they will definitely know who the institution is, and they will have validated the information about the user in a different sort of way, in a SAML assertion way, which is also based on strong certificates. So, you know, there is little chance there for any sort of piracy to happen or any sort of snooping to happen. Unless you explicitly agree to send user information to the publishers, they will not know. So I don't see this as competing values as such. It's just two very different technologies, I suppose.
Great, thanks. And along the usage line, we have a question that states, if we wanted to anonymously correlate usage to student success, i.e. students who use the library more are more successful, would there be a way to do this?
Yes, I think so. Unless you want to do it user by user. If you want to do it by user group, for example, this course used the resource more than the other course, which roughly gives you a group of users, then that's certainly easy to do without exposing any of that information to publishers. That can be kept local to your OpenAthens system, so you can use it for your reports. If you want to run per user reports, and the only thing that you have in your local system is a targeted ID, then that's going to be very tricky. What I would suggest is when you use OpenAthens that you map in some personal information about your users into your OpenAthens system, which is only locally available for you to view, not anyone else. And then you can run reports based on that and still provide full anonymity for your students accessing resources.
Great, thanks, Chris. So next question is, not all content providers currently support OpenAthens. Can you talk about how libraries using OpenAthens would provide access to content from these providers? Yeah,
so OpenAthens is not really something very magical. If the publisher supports SAML in any shape or form, if the publisher supports Shibboleth or any sort of federated access, such as in Common, for example, that publisher will have no problem working with OpenAthens. We can work with them right away. If the publisher only supports IP, that is what our proxy module is for. So we built in proxy module to still support those publishers that haven't got any other means to log users into their portals. And that can be done in an SSO manner as well. So OpenAthens you know how there's a concept of shibbolized proxy. So you could think of it as OpenAthenized proxy, except that it's all OpenAthens in-house built. But yeah, we do address that need as well.
Great, thanks, Chris. Next question revolves around IT, and the question is, do you allow scans of OpenAthens, which I imagine means the code? Our IT security department requires it.
That has never been asked before. Brownie points to whoever asked the question.
Yeah. Good questions today.
Yeah, it has never been requested for anyone to scan our code. I would have to refer this to my manager because, you know, being a proprietary solution, if someone scans the code, they might as well just copy it, right? So there may be issues with that, unless something else is meant by scanning. In which case, you know, I would welcome this question in an email so that I can refer it to our security specialists.
Great, yeah, and I will add that we do handle a number of security compliance documents on a regular basis. So if you need to put your IT department in touch with us to complete those documents, then we're happy to look at and complete those as well. But that was an interesting question, Chris. I had to send it over. So we have a few more. Let me just trying to scroll through the list and make sure that we have covered them all.
She just elaborated scanning for security purposes since they are connected with authentication.
Yep. So that would be best answered again in an email, and you can you have all of our contact information after the webinar here, and we'll answer that one offline. There are some questions about pricing, and I would just defer back to your local sales representatives for whomever you're purchasing OpenAthens through. If it's EBSCO, then your EBSCO local representatives can provide you all that information and the pricing structure. It's a little bit different for each institution, depending on the needs that you have. Here's one, Chris. Can OpenAthens login be linked to a keyboard shortcut?
Wow, another good one. Goodness, you know, I've never tried that before. It probably depends on how advanced your infrastructure is. So, for example, just today I worked with the organization that was trying to set up pass-through authentication to OpenAthens, which means that whenever they log into their machine, they don't have to do anything else. They have already established as your session, and whichever app they click on afterwards, be it OpenAthens, be it any of the resources, Talus, Blackboard, Office 365, they will be logged right in without any further prompts for authentication. So that's one such shortcut, as it were. I know that some IDPs, some identity providers that can be implemented on the infrastructure, they support shortcuts. And there are programmable keyboards, such as one I have at home, that allows you to do fancy stuff, like, for example, click on this particular application when you click a shortcut, or click the middle mouse button and it will lock your computer. So it is really, you know, up to you what you can achieve with your fantasy and the technology that you have. Quite likely, you'll probably need to have some supplementary technology, such as programmable keyboards, if you want to do shortcut access.
Great. Thanks again for that question. That was an interesting one. Is there a list of publishers that support SAML that we can compare against our existing databases?
Yes. And what I would recommend really is to share that list with EBSCO or with ourselves. We can run that check for you very, very quickly. And we can tell you exactly which ones support SAML, because what we do, we check against multiple federations. If the publisher is not in OpenAthens Federation, but for example, you are a member of InCommon, then why wouldn't you use the InCommon Federation resources that are all available for you already? We can run check against that. Or, you know, you can mix and match two federations if you like to achieve the best coverage as well. So there is a list of OpenAthens federated publishers. But just bear in mind that if you do check against that list, and I'm sure Jeff can pop you a link afterwards, just bear in mind that, you know, your options there may be a little limited than what our output would show if we are mixing and matching federations.
Excellent. We have another question. With OpenAthens, when using a database such as ProQuest, does a patron still need to create/sign into an account to get the personal folder to save documents?
You know, that is a very good question. I can't quite remember how ProQuest does it. I do think that they can utilize your targeted ID for personalization. I know that EBSCO, for example, they certainly support this user-based login. And Jeff, you can talk a little bit more about that. You would probably just request first name, last name, and email address once from the patron. And then from then on, you would just recognize them. Is that correct?
Yeah, and again, I asked that question because it touches on the subject of personalization, which is really close to one of the core functionalities of OpenAthens, and certainly with a tool like EBSCO Host, with your OpenAthens credentials, and depending upon the underlying tools, your identity provider, and things that we would connect to, you do certainly have the option to, with that OpenAthens login, personalize to your platforms. And we can certainly show you that on a demonstration as well, but that's a key user experience benefit, is being able to, with those credentials, be personalized to platforms, log in, be able to perform functionality like putting desired articles in folders, being able to download ebooks without a secondary prompt for authentication, functionality like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, talking about ProQuest, I know for a fact that eBook Central supports this functionality. They do the same thing. The main ProQuest platform, I would have to go back and log into it again because, you know, to be frank with you, I forgot what features they have. But just to be very clear, personalization is maintained on the publisher side. So if they have implemented personalization features such as Elsevier, EBSCO, ProQuest, JAMA Network, I believe as well. If they have implemented something that helps your researchers, then chances are you can use it with OpenAthens.
Great. So next question, is OpenAthens scalable across consortial groups?
Yes, yeah, and one good example of that would be Galileo Consortium that we have just won. So we are setting up OpenAthens for the entire state of Georgia, which proves that it is scalable. One previous customer that also shows a good case of scalability is National Health Service in the UK, covers the entire United Kingdom.
Fantastic. And we have one more that just came in. I received an email from EBSCO about integration with Google accounts coming soon, presumably for personalization. How does that fit in with our topic? And that gets a little bit technical, so maybe we won't give you the full explanation, but basically that ability to use your Google ID is going to be not so much for personalization, but being able to use your Google credentials to actually log into EBSCO Host. And it's a little bit different than if you were using, say, Google or G Suite for your identity provider for OpenAthens. But I will. That's a question we can answer again via email, I think, with some definitive answers for you. And I'm just making sure that we have covered all the questions. Here's a good one. Do you have any innovative customers, innovative interfaces, which makes a number of integrated library systems that have migrated from WAM, and WAM is Innovative Interfaces Proprietary Proxy? And I can answer that and say yes, and maybe Chris, you have a little bit more granularity on the
Yes.
API and how that works.
Indeed, yes is the answer. So I know EBSCO have some special tools to help work with Sierra and Polaris, but also from my end, we had some direct customers here, such as University of Leeds, very big university, have recently migrated off WAM and onto OpenAthens. And yet there are customers that managed to integrate OpenAthens prefix into their resolvers, such as Sierra, with innovative solutions as well. So yeah, Yes is the answer. And Jeff, you can probably talk a little bit more about what you guys have, what sort of widgets you have to help that integration happen.
Yep, so that integration happens. You can, if your directory, your identity provider lives inside of an innovative integrated library system, then we have in OpenAthens what are called connectors, software bridges that query that identity provider or that directory. And we do have one currently for Polaris and one for Sierra if you're utilizing either one of those integrated library systems, with the ability to develop against other products that are out there. And that's all obviously on a per site basis, depending upon the tools that you have in place. And I think there's one more question, Chris. I think we have about 3 or 4 minutes to the hour. Can you explain the concept of touching more? You've said something like the user experience in single sign-on for a service touches some other service.
What I probably meant is what is displayed in this diagram here. So if you can still see my screen, that green line here, that means that each of those applications, so you can see a SIT system here, you can see Office 365, ADFS, Blackboard, Adobe Talis reading lists, and OpenAthens, which integrates with all of these link resolvers right at the top. That means that each of those applications, they have used the module of either SAML or OpenID Connect to talk to each other. That's what I mean by touches each other. When I say application doesn't touch with anything else is what we see in this picture right here. So look at the Adobe logo. It has no connections to any other application. And old database right there, again, it has no connection to any other application. So in a more technical environment, we say they don't touch. But yeah, sorry for oversimplifying things here.
Another question that we touched on, it is regarding IP, and says, with the change to IPv6, will that totally replace all IPv4 addresses, as in IPv4 addresses just won't be around anymore?
Oh, they will certainly be around. I mean, those that still exist, they will be recycled, and they are being recycled. But I can tell you that their price is increasing for that recycling thing. So many institutions are moving to the cloud. And when they move to the cloud, guess what IP addresses they are getting assigned? They are getting dynamic IPv6 ranges because there are just billions of them. And, you know, IPv4 is now scarce. So they will still be around, probably for the foreseeable future, but you will see more and more of IPv6 entering the market. And if you need a new IP address, then chances are you will get IPv6 instead of IPv4.
Great, and one more, and sorry that I missed this the first go around, but said they are asking, we still use a password sign-on. What is the future of password sign-ons in academia and in EBSCO databases? I think, Chris, maybe you can speak to the theoretical on passwords in general in the future.
So I have recently done a very interesting research. I've spoken to a lot of industry experts. I spoke to a lot of librarians as well, and I'm publishing a research paper on this. I asked them what they see as a library future, what technologies they see entering the market, what trends they're seeing, and almost everyone said that they see username and password access disappearing because it's just no longer good enough. We see a lot of two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication entering the space, and it is also entering library space. Ultimately, as your IT team wants to secure the entire premise, they do enforce it on the library as well. So, you know, there's also a concept of contextual authentication. A lot of people expect that users will be able to pair their devices to the service in the future, such as you are able to do with Netflix at the moment, in which case that username and password will go away. so yeah, there is hope, definitely, that usernames and passwords will be reduced. The usage will be significantly reduced in the future, and publishers themselves, they try to steer away from it as well. It's no longer good enough to just embed username and password in the URL, because it's just so prone to misuse. Anyone can use that URL. So that's my side, I guess. But Jeff, what do you think from EBSCO's side?
Yeah, I think from our side, we'd echo a lot of that. I mean, again, we do an extensive amount of user experience research. Of course, we're going to support every manner of authentication that is secure and safe, that our customer base wants to utilize until it's no longer that. So I think Chris touched on it and hit on an excellent point, is that it is rapidly becoming superseded by a number of different protocols, if you will, and I think some of those are going to be easy enough that it's going to supplant user ID and password. And I think that rounds out most of the questions. For those of, we're at the top of the hour. For those of you whose questions we didn't get to, we certainly will answer those directly back to you. And if I could, I'm going to plug Christina's book, because she does a fantastic job of making complex subjects here very accessible. It's called Access to Online Resources, a Guide for the Modern Librarian, and you can find that on the internet. It is an open access title. So with that, I believe we appreciate everyone's attendance today. This is going to be recorded and will be accessible via a link that will be sent out to all registered attendees and registrants. And anyone else with closing comments?
No, I don't think so. We'll send the slides as well. A lot of people were interested in those also. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks all. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.